He tried to push her away to protect her. She refused to leave because she loved him. He asked if she was ready to die with him. She said yes. That was the end of Reese's loneliness. The room was deathly quiet, save for a faint ringing in Talia's ears. The mist outside the window had been annihilated, but the price for that victory now lay on the stone floor. Reese was unconscious. He wasn't moving.
Reese,
Talia whispered. No answer. Panic, colder than the tower's wind, seized her. She crawled to him. She laid her hand on his chest and felt, his heart beating weakly beneath his heavy robes. He was alive, but his body was as cold as ice. Even as his forehead burned with a raging heat when she touched it. Magical exhaustion. He had drained himself to the very brink. Talia knew she couldn't move him. Reese was far larger than she was. She would have to care for him here, on the cold observatory floor. Driven by adrenaline, Talia ran. She sprinted down the spiral stairs toward their bedroom. She snatched the fur blanket from the bed, grabbed a pillow, then ran to the kitchen for a basin of cold water and several clean cloths. When she returned, Reese was shivering violently, muttering softly in his sleep. He had a high fever. Talia knelt beside him. Gently, she lifted Reese's heavy head and slid the pillow underneath it. She opened his thick outer robe to let the heat escape, then draped his trembling body in the dry fur blanket. She dipped a cloth in the cold water, wrung it out, and carefully began to wipe the sweat from his brow. She had never been this close to him without anger between them. She saw him without his rage, without his magic. His face, usually so hard and cynical, looked young and achingly vulnerable in his sleep. His brow was furrowed in pain. Talia felt something strange in her heart. It was no longer fear. It was a sharp, protective ache. She wiped his face, then moved to clean the grime from his hand. As she was about to pull away, Reese's fingers, which had been clenched in his sleep, suddenly moved. They clamped down on her wrist. Talia froze. The grip was weak, but it was firm.
Reese,
she whispered. He didn't wake. He just muttered, something indistinct, and his grip on her wrist tightened. He was, even in his sleep, refusing to let her go. Talia tried to pull her hand away, very gently, but Reese only pulled her closer. The tug wasn't strong, but it was enough to make her lose her balance. She stumbled forward, ending up sitting on the stone floor beside him, her hand still trapped in his. She was stuck. She sat there for several minutes, her heart pounding. She watched his sleeping face. After a while, Reese moved again in his restless sleep. He didn't release her hand. Instead, he shifted, rolling toward her, seeking warmth, seeking comfort. In a completely unexpected movement, Reese pulled Talia's small body closer and laid his head in her lap. Talia stopped breathing. She was utterly frozen. The man who had snapped at her, who had banished her, who had looked at her with disgust, was now sleeping in her lap, his head resting on her stomach, his hand still holding her wrist tightly. She could feel his hot, feverish breath through the thin fabric of her dress. A deep, hot blush crept up her neck and flooded her cheeks. This was infinitely more intimate than sleeping in the same bed. This was total surrender. She looked down at the top of Reese's dark head. His hair was damp with sweat. He looked so tormented. After a long silence, her free hand, the one he wasn't holding, moved hesitantly. She lifted it. Then slowly, so very gently, she placed it on his hair. She began to stroke his hair. The motion was slow and soothing. Under her touch, something magical happened. Reese's furrowed brow began to relax. The restless muttering stopped. A soft sigh escaped his lips. Reese finally fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, safe in the touch of his temptress. Talia sat there on the cold observatory floor all through the night. She did not sleep. She just kept stroking the keeper's hair, watching over him in the silence. While her heart fluttered with an emotion she dared not name, Reese woke with a painful jolt. The first thing he registered was pain. Every joint in his body felt like it was on fire from magical exhaustion. The second thing he registered was warmth. He was not on the stone floor. He was comfortable. He opened his eyes. His vision was blurry. He realized his head was resting on something soft. He inhaled a scent that was now familiar, old, books and the faint herbal aroma of Talia. He froze. He was in Talia's lap. The girl's hand was still in his hair, and his own hand was gripping her wrist tightly, even in sleep. His fever had broken, but his shame was just beginning. Rhys released his grip and pulled away so fast he might as well have been touching fire.
What?
His voice was hoarse. He scrambled away from her, trying to stand but stumbling, his body too weak. He, the immortal keeper, had just been found sleeping like a vulnerable child in his offering's lap. Talia woke instantly, her eyes wide with panic.
You're awake. You had a fever. You collapsed after—
I know what happened.
Rhys snapped. He was angry. Not at Talia, but at himself. He was angry at his weakness, at his burning humiliation. He leaned against the observatory's stone wall, trying to control his breathing. He needed to shift focus from the intimacy that had just occurred. He needed to get back to the problem. He looked at the stone table in the center of the room. The magical map was calm now. The border outside the window was peaceful. The mist scoured away.
The magic,
He said, his voice still rough.
it wasn't mine. It was yours.
Talia shook her head, confused.
I don't have magic. I don't know what I did. I touched you.
Exactly.
Rhys said. He stared at Talia, truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a snake, not as a pest, not as a lonely girl. He saw her as an anomaly, a key.
Something happened when our magic touched. We need to know what.
He no longer cared about his shame. He was driven by a new urgency. The attack had nearly destroyed them. He wasn't strong enough alone. He stood, still unsteady.
Follow me.
He didn't go back to his lab. He took Talia to the deepest part of the library, to an alcove behind a bookshelf that he had always kept magically sealed. He waved his hand. The stones shifted, revealing a small, dust-filled room, the keeper's archive.
I've been misreading it all this time.
Rhys muttered, more to himself. He walked to a stone lectern in the center, where a massive dragon-hide-bound book lay open.
I always thought this was a history, but it's a manual.
Talia followed him in, her eyes wide at the faintly glowing runes on the walls.
I always assumed the tower was controlled by one keeper.
Rhys said, his voice filled with frustration at his own ignorance.
All the texts speak of the keeper.
But
Talia interrupted, her voice soft. She pointed to the open page. On it was an intricate diagram of the tower. Talia, with her knowledge of High Valyrian script, saw what Rhys had overlooked for centuries. She pointed to a small rune at the base of the diagram.
that,
She said.
it doesn't mean power. That translation is wrong. It's an archaic sigil for anchor. But look,
She traced her finger to the opposite side of the diagram.
there's another one here. The exact same rune.
Rhys froze. He leaned in closer. She was right. The tower wasn't designed for one anchor. It was designed for two. They read the text beneath it together. Their breath hung in the dusty air. The text didn't speak of a keeper and an offering. It spoke of a shield and a heart. Rhys was the shield, the raw, offensive magic that held back the mists. But the shield required a heart, a source of stable, internal magic to amplify, soothe, and strengthen the shield's power.
All this time,
Rhys whispered.
I've only been using half the tower's power.
Talia looked at him.
The tower, it knew I was here.
Rhys nodded, understanding everything at last.
It wasn't just healing you. It wasn't just giving you a fur blanket.
He remembered the potion he'd made.
It was preparing you. It was testing you. It was building your strength because it knew I was failing. It knew I was alone and I was weakening. The explosion in the observatory, that was the first time. The shield and the heart had connected.
They looked at each other. The tension between them was different now. It was no longer the awkward intimacy of a fever. It was the terrifying new reality of their destiny. Rhys realized why he had been so drawn to this girl. Why he couldn't cast her out. Why he felt relief when she was near. His half instinctively had recognized its heart.
So,
Talia whispered, voicing the terrifying question.
what happens now?
Rhys looked down at the page. He knew the answer. To make the connection permanent, to save the kingdom forever, it required a ritual bond, a conscious choice. And it meant that Talia, who had come here as a prisoner, would have to choose to be bound to this tower forever. They left the dusty archive. But the silence that followed them back into the library felt far heavier than the towers. Ancient stones, the reality of what they had found, the shield and the heart, hung between them. It was the answer to everything. Why Rhys was weakening, why Talia had healed, why their magic had exploded on contact. It was the solution, and it was a new curse. Rhys did not return to his chair. He walked straight to the large fireplace, placed both hands on the cold stone mantel and bowed his head. His back was to Talia. He looked like a man who had just been sentenced to death. Talia followed him, no longer as a frightened shadow, but as an equal.
Reese,
She said softly. He didn't move.
we know what we have to do.
Talia continued, her voice steady.
The book was clear. The ritual.
Forget the book.
Reese cut in. His voice was low and hoarse, filled with a new emotion Talia couldn't place. It wasn't anger. It was pure despair.
It's nonsense.
He continued.
The ramblings of mad, dead men. Forget what you saw.
You're lying.
Talia said. She stepped closer.
I may not know much about magic, but I know what I felt yesterday. In the observatory, I felt your power, and I felt mine. You almost died. You are weakening.
Reese spun to face her so fast that Talia flinched. His face was deathly pale, his eyes flashing wildly.
And what's the solution, Talia?
He hissed.
The solution is to ask a girl who was thrown away by her family like trash to voluntarily chain herself to this pile of rocks forever?
It's not.
It's not what?
He snapped.
Romantic? You think this is a fairy tale? You have no idea what you're asking for.
He stepped forward, towering over her.
I am cursed. I am bound to this place. I cannot leave. I am immortal, which means I have to watch the world rot and die over and over. I listen to the whispers of these stones every single night. You are finally healthy. You are finally strong. You can leave here. You can live.
I don't want to leave.
Talia said, her voice trembling but firm.
You will leave.
Reese shouted.
I will not be the one to cage you. I will not be your new prison.
Frustrated tears welled in Talia's eyes.
So what? You'd rather die. You'd rather let the mists break through and destroy the very kingdom you hate so much.
Yes.
Reese roared.
At least it would be my choice. That ritual, it requires your choice, and I forbid it.
He looked at her, an unbearable pain in his eyes.
I have spent too long in this darkness. I will not drag you into it with me. I will not become the monster they think I am.
Reese turned his face away, back toward the fireplace.
Get out of here. Go back to your room. Forget the archive.
This conversation is over. It was the cruelest command he had ever given her, not because of its anger, but because of the pain behind it. Talia stood in the middle of the library, staring at the man's rigid back. She finally understood. Reese wasn't pushing her away because he hated her, or because he thought she was a snake. He was pushing her away because he finally saw her as a person, and he, the selfish, irritable keeper, was trying to protect her from his own fate. He would rather die alone than sacrifice Talia's freedom. Reese stood with his back to Talia, staring into the fireplace. He had spoken his words. He had given her the command to forget. He listened. He waited for the sound of Talia's soft, trembling footsteps, fleeing the room to leave him alone, just as everyone always had. But there was no sound, only silence. He became irritated.
I told you, this conversation is over. Leave.
No.
The voice was quiet, but it was not trembling. It was firm. It came from directly behind him. She had not moved. Reese turned slowly, his usual rage ready to ignite.
What did you say?
Talia stood in the middle of the library. Her face was pale, but her tears were gone. Her expression was not one of fear. It was something new, something Reese had never seen on her before. Pure stubbornness.
I am not leaving.
Talia said again.
You have no choice.
Go back where?
Talia cut in, her voice rising for the first time.
Back to the kingdom. Back to my father who threw me away. Back to my sisters who laughed at me while I was dragged here. You think I have anywhere to go back to?
She took a step toward Reese, not away.
They saw me as a disgrace. I was sickly. I was weak. I wasn't beautiful. I was the failed offering. They gave me to you so I would die, either by your hand or by loneliness.
Reese was speechless. The fire in the girl's eyes burned him.
I would rather die in this tower.
She hissed, as someone who chose her own fate, than go back there and die as their disappointment. Reese, shaken by the sudden passion, tried another tactic. He turned away from her again, trying to disengage.
That is not my concern. It is not my curse.
The moment he turned, Talia moved. Quickly, before he could pull away, Talia snatched his hand. Reese froze. He could have thrown her across the room with a flick of his magic, but he didn't. This was not the gentle touch to his hair. It was not the accidental touch of a fever. This was a grip. Talia's small, thin hand clamped onto Reese's forearm with surprising strength. She would not let go.
This isn't about the kingdom.
Talia whispered, her voice now trembling with emotion.
It's not about being a heart or a shield. It's about me, having nowhere else to go, and you can't be alone anymore. I see you. You're lonely.
Reese looked down at their joined hands, her small, pale hand gripping his robed arm. He could feel her rapid pulse. He had spent centuries alone. He had pushed everyone away. And now this broken small creature, who should have been the first to flee, was the only one who refused to leave. Her persistence, her stubbornness, her warm, living touch, it all shattered Reese's final defenses. He faltered. The entire facade of the cold, immortal keeper collapsed. Reese let out a long, shuddering breath. Slowly, he turned his hand within her grasp, lacing his fingers with hers.
Talia,
he said, his voice hoarse and barely audible. He waited until her startled eyes met his.
this isn't a game.
He said softly.
This is forever. Do you understand? There is no going back. Binding yourself to this tower means binding yourself to me until the end of time.
He needed to be sure. He needed to hear it.
Are you ready?
He asked, his voice softer now than he had ever heard it.
To live and to die. In this tower, with me?
Talia looked at him. The man she had feared, the man she had nursed, the man who now held her hand as if she were his anchor. She had been looking for a purpose her entire life. She found it in a lonely man's eyes. She did not hesitate. She tightened her grip.
Ready?
Reese closed his eyes, the weight of centuries lifting from his shoulders. He was not alone. He opened his eyes. He looked at Talia. He still didn't know how to do this. He was awkward. He was a wizard, not a lover. With a stiff motion, he tugged on their joined hands. The pull sent the light Talia stumbling forward, crashing into his chest. Talia gasped in surprise, her face pressed against his robes. Awkwardly, almost mechanically, Reese's other arm came up. He placed it on her back, drawing her into an embrace. It was the first hug he had given in perhaps a BC. It was stiff and uncertain. Talia froze for a moment, stunned by the sudden intimacy. Then, she let out the breath she had been holding her entire life. She returned the hug, her small hands wrapped around his broad back, gripping his robes tightly, as if she would never let go. She buried her face in his chest. Reese remained rigid for a second. Then slowly his arms tightened. His large hand moved from her back to the back of her head, holding her, protecting her. In the dusty library, in the heart of the silent tower, the shield and the heart were finally united. They were no longer alone. They were one, bound by choice. In all the ways that mattered, they had just been married. The hug in the library lasted a long time. Talia could feel Reese's strong, irregular heartbeat beneath her ear. And Reese, he just closed his eyes, inhaling the faint scent of dry herbs and old parchment from Talia's hair. He had never felt this calm. Finally, very reluctantly, it was Reese who broke the embrace. He took a step back, and a profound awkwardness immediately enveloped them. They had just agreed to forever. They had just, in all the ways that mattered, gotten married. Now what? Outside the library's high windows, the sun had set. The tower was dark, lit only by the magical torches that now seemed to burn brighter, as if responding to their new bond. Reese cleared his throat. He looked utterly at a loss for what to do. The man who could fight mist monsters and command, the stones of the tower now had no idea how to speak to a woman he had just embraced.
It's night.
He said, sounding ridiculous to his own ears. Talia looked at him, a blush still painting her cheeks.
Yes.
An awkward silence.
Right.
Reese said, trying to take control. He reverted to practical matters.
The ritual. In the archive. It must be done, but not tonight. We need to rest.
He pointed toward the door.
You can use the bedroom.
Your bedroom.
Talia asked softly.
It's our room.
Reese corrected, his voice stiff with awkwardness.
I suppose. I don't know the rules.
He walked first and Talia followed. They walked down the hallway, which now felt different. It was no longer the cold corridor where Talia slept on the floor, but the hallway of their home. They arrived at Reese's bedchamber. The fire in the hearth was already lit. The tower itself seemed to be anticipating their needs. Reese stood in the middle of the room, looking just as awkward as he had when Talia first walked in.
You shower first?
He said, gesturing to a private bathing room.
I will find something.
He practically fled the room, retreating back to the library. Talia bathed. The warm water felt magical, soothing her nerves. She had nothing to wear but her one worn-out dress. When she stepped out, wrapped in a thick towel, she found something laid out on the bed. It was a simple silk nightshirt, clearly not hers. Rhys must have retrieved it from an ancient wardrobe, a relic from another era in the tower. She put it on. It was far too large, but it was soft. Rhys returned, holding a book, as if it were his shield. He saw Talia, standing by the fire in the borrowed nightshirt, and he froze. She was beautiful, not the striking beauty of her sisters, but a quiet, restful beauty. Her face was no longer pale and sickly. Her eyes were clear. She looked alive.
Rhys,
Talia asked, seeing him just standing there. Rhys flinched. He put the book down, hard. Sleep, he growled. It was his old command, but with no anger in it. It was a panicked command. He walked to the bed and sat on the very edge, his back to her. He didn't know what to do. Talia understood. This man might be immortal, but in this, he was as inexperienced as she was. He had been a hermit for centuries. Slowly, Talia walked to the other side of the bed and sat down. The massive mattress stretched between them. They sat in silence for a full minute.
Rhys,
Talia whispered.
What?
He answered, his voice tight.
I'm scared.
It was a simple honesty. Rhys finally turned his head. His expression softened from its panic.
Scared of me?
No.
Talia said.
Scared of forever. It's so big.
Rhys nodded. He understood that. He reached his hand out across the wide expanse of sheets, the same gesture from the library. Talia placed her hand in his. Rhys didn't pull away. He just held her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it in a hesitant, uncertain motion. Then he took a deep breath, as if about to dive into deep water. He moved across the bed. He didn't rush. He moved slowly, sitting in front of her, not letting go of her hand. He studied her face in the firelight. He lifted his free hand and, repeating the motion that had panicked him in the library, touched her hair. This time he didn't pull his hand away. He tucked the strand behind her ear. Then his hand slid down, cupping her cheek. His hand was warm.
I'm scared too,
Rhys whispered. Talia leaned into his touch. It was enough. It was the permission Rhys needed. Very slowly, with the cautious doubt of a man relearning a long-forgotten movement. Rhys leaned forward. He paused an inch from her, his eyes on her lips, giving her a chance to pull away. Talia didn't pull away. She closed her eyes. Rhys kissed her. It was not a passionate or demanding kiss. It was a first true kiss. It was hesitant, soft, and full of an awkward wonder. It was a question. Talia answered it. She lifted her hands and placed them on his shoulders, pulling him just slightly closer. The kiss deepened, a silent vow. Rhys's centuries of loneliness melted in that warmth. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. They just looked at each other, their foreheads almost touching. Rhys looked utterly stunned by his own feelings. He cleared his throat, his usual scowl returning, but his eyes remained soft.
All right,
He said, his voice hoarse.
that's enough. Sleep.
But this time he didn't move back to his side. He lay down on the bed and pulled Talia with him. He drew the covers over them. Then, in a surprisingly possessive move, he wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Talia gasped in surprise at the sudden intimacy. She could feel Rhys's steady heartbeat against her back. Rhys buried his face in her hair.
Now be quiet, he mumbled into her neck. I need to rest.
Talia smiled in the darkness. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer cold. She was no longer alone. She was in her husband's arms. Rhys buried his face in Talia's hair, inhaling the calming scent. He was almost asleep. But then he felt it, the soft, real warmth of Talia's body pressed tightly against his back. Talia, who had just begun to feel safe, felt it too. The man behind her, who had just felt like a solid protector, had now changed. There was a new tension in his body. Something at his waist, pressing against her lower back, felt hard, hot, and very distinct. She understood what it was. Strangely, she wasn't afraid. She was just curious. She called his name, her voice soft and a little husky.
Rhys.
She felt the man freeze behind her.
Be quiet.
Rhys growled, his voice strained, almost panicked. He buried his face deeper into her hair, as if he could hide. He was ashamed. He had sworn to protect her. And his long dormant body was now betraying him with such an uncontrollable, human reaction.
That,
Talia whispered again, unable to help herself.
I said be quiet.
Reese's voice was now tight with struggle. But Talia, for the first time in her life, felt brave. Driven by a new daring impulse, she intentionally moved her hips slightly, shifting to press back against him. Reese hissed behind her, his breath catching sharply.
Talia, don't.
The warning only made Talia more curious. She found Reese's hand that was wrapped around her waist, lifted the large hand to her lips, and gently kissed his knuckles. That deliberate touch of her lips, it was the last thing Reese could withstand.
You.
Reese snarled, his voice hoarse with an unbearable mix of anger and desire. With a single, fast, and feral movement, the movement of the keeper, not the lover, he released her, only to roll and move. In an instant, he was on top of Talia, his arms braced on either side of her head, trapping her on the mattress. Talia's eyes widened in surprise, but not in fear.
You don't know what you're doing.
He hissed, his eyes gleaming in the dim firelight. He didn't look angry. He looked tormented, lost.
Reese.
Stop talking.
He growled. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not the gentle kiss from the library. It was a merciless kiss. A kiss that was demanding, hungry, and desperate. The kiss of a man who had starved for 1,000 years and had finally found his meal. His hands moved from her face, down to the silk nightshirt he had given her. He gripped the fabric at her shoulders. He knew he was moving too fast. He knew this was too rough. A part of his mind, the logical keeper, was screaming at him to stop. But the human part of him, the part that had been locked away for so long, was now roaring to the surface. Talia gasped beneath the kiss as she felt how rough his grip was. She could feel the tremors in his body. This was a pure loss of control.
Reese.
She whispered between kisses.
Slow down, please.
That soft plea, the word please, cut through the burning fog of lust in his mind. Reese froze. He lifted his head, staring down at Talia beneath him. Her face was flushed, her lips swollen, her wide eyes looking up at him, not with fear, but with trust. And the realization hit him like ice. He had almost broken the only thing that had saved him. He had lost control. He released his grip on her nightshirt as if the fabric had burned him.
I can't.
He whispered, his voice cracking with self-loathing. He rolled off her, sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to her. He was shaking. Talia was silent for a moment, confused by the sudden change. Then she sat up.
Reese.
I hurt you.
He said flatly, refusing to turn.
No.
Talia said. She moved behind him, hesitantly placing a hand on his tense shoulder.
You didn't hurt me. You just...
I lost control.
He snarled.
I'm a monster, Talia.
You're not.
Talia said softly but firmly.
You're human, and I'm here too. I won't break.
She shifted, kneeling on the mattress beside him, forcing him to look at her.
I chose you.
She said.
All of it.
Reese stared at her, seeing the resolve in her eyes. Slowly, he lifted his own hands, covering hers on his face. He took a deep, shuddering breath, stilling the tremors in his body. He leaned forward, and this time, he kissed her again. The kiss was still deep, still passionate, but there was no more panic in it. It was deliberate. That night, they resumed what they had started. But this time, they were no longer a keeper losing control in a frightened offering. They were the shield and the heart, together,